So for my independent reading book, I did Night Shift by Stephen King. It was published June 24th, 2008, but most of the stories appeared in a magazine called The Cavalier from like 1970 to 1978. There are a whole bunch of different stories, so it's kind of hard to come up with a summary, but they're a collection of short horror stories that invite you to take a peek under what lies, invite you to take a peek at what lies under the white sheet. So the white sheet's a metaphor for like a dead body, because it's kind of like horror stories and creepy stuff. So the first school of criticism I did was psychoanalytical, and my first question was, how do the operations of repression structure or inform the work? So just a little bit about repression, because I didn't know about it. Freud, so psychoanalytical focuses is a school of thought that uses a lot of Freudian thought. Freud used the metaphor of a large anteroom containing many physical acts and mental processes, and a second smaller like apartment that like a reception room, and where the consciousness, so all of your like what you think about besides, it's okay. And then in between these is like a person who chooses like who goes where, like a bodyguard or a bouncer at a club. And so repression is when you like repress things into the large anteroom and you don't let them get through. And then Freud has all these theories about how when you try and keep things in the room, it like messes you up and stuff. And then in the introduction to his book, Stephen King had a line that kind of reminded me of that, which is irrelevant to my question, but it has to do with psychoanalytical thought. And it's, all of us seem to come equipped with filters on the floors of our minds, and all of the filters having different sizes and meshes. What catches in my filter may run right through yours. What catches in yours may pass through mine. No sweat. All of us seem to have built-in obligation to sift through the sludge that gets caught in our respective mind filters, and what we find there usually develops into some sort of sideline. So that's not dealing with oppression, but just with the whole large consciousness and subconsciousness. So to answer my first question, which is again because I've talked for a while, is how do the operations of repression structure or inform the work? So I focus mainly on how it informs the work. The story that I used to answer this question was a story called The Ledge, and in it, it's this multimillionaire hedge fund guy who and this pro tennis player who cheats on his wife and falls in love with his wife, and the millionaire is like a asshole, but he finds out, and he challenges this tennis player to a bet. Can you walk around the ledge of this building, which is 5 inches wide, and like 20 stories high, or you're going to go to jail for 40 years because I planted a whole bunch of heroin in your car, and you'll never see my wife. But if you win, you can have all this money, I'll call off the heroin, and you can have my wife. No big deal. And yeah, and you can have my wife. So this tennis player, before getting on the ledge, he says to himself that he's taking deep breaths in and out, and he says, and I quote, "It's not really an exercise at all, but a form of self-hypnosis. With every inhale-exhale, you throw a distraction out of your mind until there's nothing left but the match ahead of you. I got rid of the money with one breath, and Kressner himself with two. Marcia took longer. Her face kept rising in my mind, telling me not to be stupid, not to play his game, that Kressner never welched, but he always hedged his bets. I didn't listen. I couldn't afford to. If I lost this match, I wouldn't have to buy the beers and take the ribbing. I'd be so much scarlet sludge splattered on a block of Deacon Street in both directions." So in this one, he tries to force that door between his consciousness and his subconscious closed from the conscious side, which is different than repression, which is kind of the opposite, but it's kind of similar. And he does that he uses repression to calm himself down so that he can make it across the edge of the ledge without falling off to his death. And he does actually make it, and then he kills the other guy. But he makes the other guy walk around the ledge and then kills him. So the operation of repression informed the work. So the repression, him repressing all of these fears and anxieties within himself, informed the work because it let him be able to make it across the ledge, which is a great feat. Okay, and then the second question that I asked for psychoanalytical was, are there prominent words in the piece that could have different meanings? So I answered this question using the story called Quitters Incorporated. So this one is about a company that helps you quit smoking, but instead of giving you like drugs or therapy or something, they get all your information, and then if you smoke, they take one of your family members and like electrocute them. The word that the whole thing is, it's a little creepy because they're super into this nice building, and yeah. So anyway, they're very pragmatic. So that's a word that comes up, like, I think it was 20 times in the story. The guy who is the worker who is working with this this guy. The employee from Quitters Incorporated. Stop it! The employee from Quitters Incorporated. The employer from Quitters Incorporated keeps saying that they're pragmatic. They're not romanticists, they're pragmatic. To quit smoking is very hard. They say that the relapse rates are higher than heroin addicts. So he says he talked pragmatic. So the prominent words have different meanings. When I think of pragmatic, I think of someone who's like, I think of good things. I think of dealing with things. The definition is dealing with things sensibly and realistically in a way that is practical rather than theoretical consideration. So someone who gets things done quickly, efficiently, and well. But he uses the word pragmatic to describe the Quitters Incorporated, which has definitely, it might not switch the meaning because it works, and in the story it works, and he gets recommended by another guy, and it works well. He smokes, he loses a whole bunch of weight, and he gets jobs, and his life gets better. But it's a bit heartless, and it's cruel, and it's bad. It's evil, and those are not connotations that usually associate with the word pragmatic. So prominent words in the piece that have and then another thing is the word pragmatic is almost like a trigger for this guy, because every time he says, "Oh, we're so pragmatic," he gets angry because of the switch in the connotations. There's a quote from the employee, and he says, "When a romantic tries to do good things and fails, they give him a medal. When a pragmatist succeeds, they wish him in hell." And they say, "Shall we go?" And go and watch his wife get electrocuted. Yeah. Okay. So the second criticism I did was postmodern criticism. So the question was, my first question was, how does the work undermine generally accepted truths? So I didn't use a story to answer, so I used the introduction again because I thought the introduction was really good. It's actually my favorite part of the story. But anyway, the generally accepted truth that I think this story undermines is things that aren't real can't scare you. I'm not sure how much of a generally accepted truth it is because we're afraid of evil things. But anyway, so because we're afraid of like the dark because of the things that are in the dark. And you're afraid of heights because you can die, but things that aren't real, like vampires and scary things in the dark, shouldn't scare you because they're not real. But there's this wonderful quote from Stephen King in his introduction that goes, "When you read horror, you don't really believe what you read. You don't believe in vampires, werewolves, trucks that suddenly start up and drive themselves. The horrors that we all do believe in are hate, alienation, growing up lovelessly old, tottering out into a hostile world on the unsteady legs of adolescence. We are, in our real everyday worlds, often like the masks of comedy and tragedy, grinning on the outside, grimacing on the inside. There's a central switching point somewhere inside, a transformer maybe, where the wires leading from those two masks connect. And that is a place where the horror story so often hits home." So, it's a horror story, and they're all horror stories. And he has the whole introduction is him explaining why he's writing horror stories. And his whole thing about horror is that the things that scare you aren't like great big Draculas, but the things that you can relate to in the horror stories. And when you see your life reflected in a horror story, that's the scariest thing of all. And then so the second question I did with postmodern criticism was, what ideology does this text seem to promote? So, also in the introduction, he has this quote that he got from the review of a horror film that goes, it's a wonderful movie for people who like to slow down and look at car accidents. And then he talks about it, he says, "It's a good snappy line, but when you stop and think about it, it applies to all horror films and movies. The great literature of the supernatural often contains the same let's slow it down and look at the accident syndrome. So that's the ideology that I think this whole series of books is promoting. It's that you want to look, you want to read it, and you don't want to read it. You don't want to be scared. Nobody wants to live their life terrified, but you can't help but peek under the sheet. You can't help but finishing the story, but going on to the next one to see how bad it could be. And yes, so that's the ideology, I think, is the whole let's slow it down and look at the accident syndrome, let's peek under the white sheet, that curiosity. Yeah, so in conclusion, I think the postmodern criticism was definitely easier because I kind of had the answers in the introduction, but the psychoanalytical was more fun because they're horror stories, so it's fun to look at how fear and repression and all of those like crazy things and how they mess with your head. The one thing that I thought was interesting that in a lot of these stories happened was that the fear tended to make people seem more able and logical. So like with the tennis player and the relaxing, and there's another story where there's these creepy kids in the grass and they like kill everything, but or kill everyone once they pass 18. But and the people in these stories, like they're very calm and they're very good at keeping themselves like there's no screaming and running around. There's no like hysterics or anything, and I don't know how realistic that is because I think that if I was in any of those situations, I would probably panic and die. But I'd like to think that I wouldn't. I'd like to think that I'd be calm and rational. And so these people are what I think I would like to be. Like the tennis player talks about how he's got these he's got strong ankles and reflexes and he's calming himself down. And I'd like to think that I'm able to do that. And so what they try and do is things that I think I would like to do in the situation, and it's just terrifying what happens to them anyway. And then I just like his whole attitude towards fear and his whole attitude towards fear and the way he explains it in the introduction makes you want to read the stories even more because you want to peek under the sheet. You want to scare yourself a little bit. Yeah. So I think that postmodern criticism was easier, but psychoanalytical was just a better criticism and more fun to do. Yay.